Good evening and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today I'm going to be taking a deeper delve into Dungeons & Dragons, the Expert Rulebook. For those of you that might not be familiar with this is the second box set of the BECMI series of Dungeons & Dragons game boxes that came out between 1983 and 1987. D&D or Dungeons and Dragons actually ran parallel to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition during this time period. So this was a revised version of the previous Dungeons and Dragons box sets. Going from the mid 1970s through to approximately 1982 or 83 when the first Red Box revised was released. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to piggyback off of the last video that I ran and just deal with what is new in this expert rules set. So here I have the physical copy, and I had tabbed off some of these, but the going through and flipping through the pages, as much as I would like to do that, it's a little bit harder to zoom in on the points that I want to make. So I'm going to use the PDF to bring you through the various parts of this book that introduce something new. So I'm just going to switch screens here and bring you to the PDF. So here's the front cover, obviously. This is a Larry Elmore cover, iconic image. And what I wanted to focus on, like I said, I'm going to focus on what is new. And the very first new part of this, and I will go a little bit larger here, is that this is for character levels 4 through 14. So what you're going to see is whereas the basic set was characters level 1 through 3, and that set really was designed to just get new players familiar with dungeon crawling. So there wasn't that much world building involved in that rule set. It was just getting the players familiar with how to play the various classes, levels 1 through 3, and learn the basic mechanics of the game. The expert rules now is taking the characters from 4 to 14, and if you're not familiar with the character levels, 14 is fairly high. So this rule set is taking the characters from their introduction to becoming fairly powerful individuals in whatever game setting they happen to be playing in. So these rules, they begin by just talking about hit dice and hit points, which is expected, and the maximum levels and experience points. It goes into horses. All right, so it's kind of odd that it sounds like they're introducing horses to the game system, but the whole premise of the expert rules is that the players are now expanding and traveling the world much more, and the cheapest and most frequent means of transportation they're going to use is on horses. So, and the characters by this point are probably becoming wealthy enough that they can purchase their own horses, including war horses. So that's something that that's going to start to open up to them as they start approaching level 3 or so. So that's introduced. The idea of titles, and with titles, title isn't just, oh, you're a lord or you're a master thief or you're a master, an archmage, or those sound great, but what they actually do is they're a reflection of your character's influence in this broader expanding world that they're going to be operating in. So The titles include a lot of social interaction with the world in general. So these aren't low level player characters at level 9. They're starting to take a leading role in whatever community they're living in, or wherever they travel. They're traveling with these titles with them. There's some rules on spells, and between these level ranges of 4 to 14, spellcasters are starting to develop the ability to reverse spells. And so the reverse of cure light wounds is a cause light wounds. It typically requires the cleric, in this case, to be double the level of being able to cast a cure light wounds. So once they gain that ability, which is level 2, they'd have to be a level 4 cleric in order to be able to cast the reverse. And the same thing goes with magic users. If they have a light spell, then they can learn the darkness spell at double the level that they gained light spell at. So that's an introduction to players. Multiple spell effects and how they kind of happen at the same time. So 2 haste spells do not allow attacks at 4 times the rate, but you might be able to combine other types of spell effects, at the same time. So not all spell effects stack. Sometimes they enhance, and sometimes they might even hinder one another as well. And so that's something for the dungeon master to bear in mind when players are casting spells. I'm going to skip over, all of the character sections, because it's not really new other than just an expanding list of spells, or the listing of higher experience tables and such. So at level 9, as I said, a fighter becomes a lord, a magic user becomes at level 9 a wizard, and they go through various information here. What I want to do is I want to jump ahead to page 22. So a thief becomes a master thief at level 9. In most cases it's level 9. In some cases it's a little bit higher. Dwarf lord is at 9. A elf is a Lord Wizard at level 9. A halfling becomes I believe, a sheriff. A sheriff at level 8. But that's their cap. All right. The rules expand later on that allows to go beyond that cap. So, the Dungeon Master section. So this is page 22. It introduces clans. So demi-human races of dwarves, elves, and halflings have a different way of life than humans, and they usually live longer and have stricter way of life and find the security in large family groupings called clans. Now, in many cases, I say to introduce the rules to the players as they're going from one box set to the next. However, if you have dwarves, elves, and halflings in your group, such as my group, I have about 12 players in my group now, although they don't all play at the same time. And, I have one of each, at least one of each of these demi-human races. You're not going to wait until level 4 to introduce the players that are playing a halfling, a dwarf, or an elf to the concept of clans. They're going to know about their own culture, from level 1. So this is a case where I would, let players know that are playing those demi-humans that, hey, this is something that you need to know, even though it is in the expert rules set. Introduction of combat, some certain types of combat, aerial combat, for instance, some additional rules on climbing. Construction of strongholds becomes a major part of or major addition in this expert rule book. As those player characters reach their highest titled level, uh, typically 9, they can start to construct strongholds. Now, strongholds are very expensive, or a wizard's tower, or whatever, a church for a cleric, or a thieves' guild for a thief. These strongholds, these constructions are very expensive, usually in the 250,000 gold piece range. But the player characters have to be that minimum level of 9, or in the case of a magic user, 11, in order to build these structures. And that's because it is not until that level that they actually start to attract followers in order to in order to occupy these structures or even help create these. The idea of mercenaries and followers are brought in, as I just mentioned. So the cost of hiring mercenaries in order to man your strongholds, or followers to follow along. So clerics, once a castle is constructed, between 50 and 300 loyal troops will come to help the cleric. All right, so your player characters in your campaign are going to start to attract the following, and they're starting to move. Even though they're player characters, they're starting to become part of the fabric of the world that you're creating. And that's a really important thing for you as the DM to you know inform your players of, is that their characters are starting to become so important, like influencers in their communities. And that comes with responsibilities and such that the players will have to become aware of, and some will relish it, and some will be kind of like King Conan, where they hate having that responsibility. They weren't really planning on taking on those kinds of responsibilities. So it's all interesting role play to have. Goes into further details with running strongholds and taxes and such. The next section I wanted to focus on a little bit, because you are starting to build the world for the player characters to campaign in. And so this this expert rule book starts to focus on designing wilderness areas, and placing the hometown and local dungeons into this area. And when I first read this, the idea of the hometown, really reminds me of the way computer RPGs have what are kind of like adventure hubs. And that's what the hometown, starts to remind me of, is how, the players will have a place that they call their home, that they return to from adventures. Maybe they'll pick up their adventures from this town, and this town becomes a hub. But it's the place that they return to. So if you're familiar with like the Dragonlance saga, they always returned to the same town. That was always their home. And so you can create that kind of an atmosphere for your player character group in your campaign world, where they're always returning to this one place, and it'll become important to them for that reason, that this is their home base, their hometown. Go into the various combat tables and your wilderness encounter tables and such. These are all useful charts that you can use, even if you're playing in basic. It's still this is a nice way to figure out what am I going to do for a random encounter. Where am I going to place it? Now you can see for dungeons, these are very specific. It's levels 4 to 5, 6 to 7, 8 to 10, and you don't want to use these encounters for a party that is on average anything much below level 4. You might introduce um, some of these creatures, or monsters to a player character group of level 3, but maybe only one or two of them, at a time. So it's a good way to start to introduce the player character group to more challenging, monsters out there without making it a random kind of encounter. Same thing goes with the treasures. So the treasures here in the expert rulebook are not really meant to use these charts if your player characters are still in the basic range of 1 to 3, because as you can see, some of these weapons and armor and such are starting to become, fairly powerful. You don't want your level 2 fighter, just randomly finding a +3 sword. It's going to throw the balance of your level progression and your adventure writing off when they have, really powerful magic items. So the way that the BECMI system is written is that you will function within each book as you go along. And then we get into some more about non-human lands and other world building scenarios and campaign information. And then it's going to get to the monster section eventually here. So I'm going to switch views and I'm going to show you something really quick what I did with the monsters. So I like to plan adventures out and, even write them, fully fleshing them out and then, leaving room for my player group to, to take side steps or whatever. Just happens naturally. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to get all of the monsters that could potentially be utilized during that in my planning phase. And so what I did was I printed out just the monster sections in all four of the first BECMI rule books. And so if my player characters are all in the 1 to 3 range, I'm using these from basic. As they approach and start to, as a group are in that level 3 range, then I can go to the expert and start looking through these to see, all right, well, what do I want to throw at them to kind of just introduce them to a slightly, greater challenge. I would not jump to, let's say, a beholder, all right, which is in the companion set. I'm not going to throw a beholder at a party of level 4 characters. Much, much too powerful of a creature for them to face. So this will help you if you're still maintaining the idea in your head that these are the level bands for the party as a whole in order to utilize these monsters. So, I wanted to, I just printed those out from the PDFs just so that I had it on the side as a reference and to keep it in mind. The only thing I would take from the rules encyclopedia at this point in time where we're still bringing a new character group along in learning the system would be like the weapons, the more comprehensive equipment and weapons, charts that they have, because that's not going to really break the power curve if they, just have a greater selection of armor types, or they say, hey, you know what, I know I'm only 3rd level, but I want to buy a horse and I want to buy barding for the horse. You don't have to wait for your player character to be level 4 through 14 in order to introduce, some of those items to them. So, well, once again, I'm a big proponent of slowly rolling Dungeons and Dragons out to the players, especially new players, and so that they can learn the system and the world kind of unfolds in front of them as they're becoming more powerful and they're learning more about the world and they're meeting these new challenges that are coming up. And I mean, I have to think back 35, 40 years when I was doing this as a, as a kid and later as a teenager, and just try to remember what it was like. And it was slow going. I mean, you do not gain levels extremely fast in these older versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Whether it be D&D or, first edition AD&D. Uh, it was slow going. It took time. You actually gained more experience from treasure being found than from actual combat or role playing. I always reward some role playing, but anyway, they're really great system. And if you haven't tried playing Dungeons and Dragons BECMI, I really encourage you to give this game system a try. It is really becoming my favorite version of Dungeons and Dragons to play. It's certainly very popular to introduce new players to Dungeons and Dragons or new players to role playing in general because it is a very easy system to learn in the beginning, and if you slowly walk them through becoming more complex, that's what this system is really designed to do. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Uh, if you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please leave your questions and comments in the section. This is my second running of this or recording of this because the last one, for some reason, the sound quality was really off. There was a buzzing in the background. Hopefully that's not happening again. I'll check it this time to make sure that it's clear and then just re-upload this. So but anyway, thanks for the heads up on that because I caught it within the first 5 minutes of posting it up. So hopefully this one will be fine. Um, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. The last video that I did in this series, which I'll link, was tremendously popular video. Well over 500 views in 24 hours, and a lot of subs signed on. So it was really the series of box sets is that popular that the channel is just exploding with interest on these, and so I again suggest that you take a look at it. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon because, like I said, there's a lot of people playing this system, and there's a lot of games out there that you can find that people are doing online, on virtual tabletops and such. So you all have a great evening. Thanks for joining, and look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. Take care.